Hello everybody, welcome to Snyder's Inc. And today we have got a Twisted Minds video, and this is Yang, the serial killer with 60 plus victims. We're gonna get right into it, ladies and gentlemen. Hit the like button, subscribe button, comment your thing down below. Let's go.
The man you're looking at on screen was the most feared man in the country of China. His spree would go undetected throughout several states, including his hometown of Henan, and spread through Anhui, Hebei, and Shandong. He conquered the innocent civilians of these areas, murdering 67 people in total. This unbelievable case has yet to be covered by many channels on YouTube, given the little information surrounding the case in English. Made possible with deep research and language translation, I present to you the sadistic case of Yang Xinghai.
Okay, so this might be a case that most people here might not actually know about. It's gonna be interesting to find out.
Han Fangying was old. She had a difficult...
What a start! What a start! Han was old. That's the first line of this whole storytelling.
long life. But in the midst of all of her difficulties, she was lucky to have a son who cared enough to visit her every morning. However, in the past 2 days, she hadn't seen him. She also hadn't seen her precious grandchildren, and this deeply bothered her. You see, her son, Li Xingda, had just lost his wife, and since her demise, had struggled to take care of his 2 kids, a 13-year-old boy, Yang Li, and a daughter, who was 9 years old, Li Yangyang, who were at the ages where they needed his attention and care the most. This was one reason why Han Fangying was so worried. She knew her son was grieving, and she could understand if he missed a day or two. But the villagers were telling her that they hadn't seen him either. Not at his workplace, not in the market, and not in the neighborhood. So, Han Fangying decided to pay her son a visit for a change. When she arrived at his house, the door was locked, and there was an eerie silence. At first, she wondered if Li Xingda had traveled with the kids. But the mere thought of it made her chuckle in disbelief. There was no way on earth her son would leave the village without telling her. And moreover, at least one villager would have seen them leave. Han Fangying knocked on her son's door, and his cows responded, mooing from inside the house. Again, this was odd. Li Xingda always let his cows out every morning. He only kept them in at night. If he had traveled, he wouldn't have locked them in with no access to food. A lot of things weren't making sense, but she was determined to make sense of it all.
Okay, so she was confused that he wasn't answering. There's no way he left because nobody saw him leave. There's no way no one would have seen him leave at all. Unless I guess he left during the night, but even then probably I guess someone might have seen him leave still. And cows are left inside, no way access to food and that. And this old woman who he made sure to let us know was old is definitely is like, where's my son? Where's my grandchild? He's probably more concerned about the grandchildren than he is the kids. That's just the grandparents' instinct. They always care about the grandchildren more than their actual children.
So she found a spare key in his yard, opened the door, and just past the cows, through their open bedroom door, she saw them. Her son, grandson, and granddaughter, sprawled on their beds. At first, they looked like they were fast asleep. But as she leaned in to get a better view, as she called out their names, she saw the blood, and she could not believe her eyes. There were 2 beds. Li Xingda lay beside his boy, Yang Li, on the bigger bed, drenched in a pool of blood. His head had been battered beyond recognition, and there was...
So this guy, this young guy, who's the making of this serial killer, he's the serial killer. I had no issue taking the life of children. Like, he took the life of a man and 2 children and didn't think twice on it. That is fucking pure evil. Is that the first people he took the lives of were children too? That's evil, bro. That's one evil psychotic bastard.
There was a gaping hole in his forehead. Her grandson had suffered the same fate. But she also noticed one tragic detail. There was mud on the little boy's hands. Much later, Han Fangying would come to learn that Yang Li had tried to flee from his killer. She would learn that he had fought hard and lost.
Wow.
The last victim was her precious granddaughter, Li Yangyang. No one needed to tell her because she already knew whatever beast had violently taken the life of her son and grandson had also taken her granddaughter. But it had also touched her first, because the little girl lay naked on the smaller bed. And there was the same gaping hole in her forehead. Crippled with
That is so fucked up, man. That was so fucked up.
grief and completely riddled with despair, Han Fanying demanded answers from the police when they arrived that evening. But it would take another 8 months before she got any. You see, Han Fanying wasn't alone in her grief. At the time, a series of violent murders, eerily similar to the one inflicted on her family, had taken place over 4 provinces in eastern and central China.
Oh, so this is a case where the person was literally just. This was not the first one. This was just multiple times this type of situation had happened from this evil fucking guy. I'm pretty sure it's easy to call him. I mean, he took the life of children. I'm pretty sure he sexually abused one, sexually assaulted one, the youngest granddaughter. Like, there's so much that's fucked up here. Pure fucking evil.
The villagers were calling the demented perpetrator the Hammerman. The media had, rather unimaginatively, tagged him the monster killer. But when the judge would call the 35-year-old serial killer to stand to answer for his crimes, the name he responded to was Yang Xinghai. When I killed people, I had a desire. This inspired me to kill more. I don't care whether they deserve to live or not. It is none of my concern. I have no desire to be part of society. Society is not my concern. These were the words of Yang Xinghai to the detectives after he got caught. But if you were there on the 17th of July, 1968, you wouldn't have noticed anything particularly odd about the man. If you watched him grow up in his village, snuggled somewhere within Ziyang County in Henan province, what you would have found was a quiet, middle child with too many siblings and financially challenged parents.
How does a guy just become so messed up in the head that he can do that to people? Like, it's an evil, sadistic devil in a brain. Like, he has to be like, he's as evil as the fucking Satan himself.
All just struggling to survive. You would have immediately noticed he was a quiet one, introverted, with an eye for the arts. In fact, his father would tell investigators many years later. Early on, he noticed his son had unique abilities to accurately draw anything he saw. You would also notice that Yang Xinghai had ambition, and he backed that ambition with hard work. His neighbors who had known him from childhood described him as an honest, hard-working boy who never looked for trouble. And they weren't wrong. Everyone who knew the young boy knew he hated the poverty he was born into, and he was confident that he could work his way out of it. This was his only recognizable flaw at the time: ambition. And unfortunately for him, it would be the catalyst for the years of misery that lay ahead, because there was a load of misery in his life. The older he grew, the more he became aware of how disadvantaged he was compared to his peers. It got worse when he got into high school, and he could hardly afford anything. His school was far from his village, so his father sent him to live with a relative who was financially better off. Unfortunately for Young, this relative segregated him on arrival. He wasn't allowed to eat with his family, and he had to source his own firewood and food to cook meals for himself if he had any intentions of eating. The only care he received from this relative was the roof over his head. It was during this period he began to miss the warmth of his family. During that time, he didn't mind the poverty that they had suffered. At least, they had all suffered together. In school, his situation was considerably worse, at least in his head. He was missing out on basic things like meal tickets that almost every other student had access to. While they exchanged those tickets for food in school, Young cooked meals using wild vegetables he plucked from a field close to his school. And after school and during the weekends, he would herd cattle for money. All of this was happening around the time Young was entering puberty. His teenage hormone-fueled insecurities were probably in full bloom, and as is often the case with teenagers, had become central to his existence. Unsurprisingly, his grades slipped, and eventually, Yang Xinghai got fed up with high school, quit, and ran away.
I know that. I understand that feeling. School can become tiresome, and if you don't feel like you belong, if you suffer mentally in your own head because of the situations you will find yourself in, you will not be able to finish high school. There's no way.
A weekend before his high school exit, he had paid a visit to his father and complained bitterly about his living conditions and his inability to afford a meal ticket. In the days that would follow, his father would gather some bags of wheat, travel to his high school, and rush to its canteen, carrying those bags of wheat on his back, seeking to exchange them for meal tickets for his son. But it was too late. A teacher would inform the old man that Young had already been absent for several days. His family panicked, and his mother burst into tears, fearing the worst. Everyone searched for the teenager, but they couldn't find him. He was lost. It's chilling when you think about how symbolic that statement was at the time, because it was at this point in Yang Xinghai's life that his morality began to dangerously edge toward a steep cliff.
So this is the time where he just kind of lost it. He kind of lost his ring, and he didn't want to be part of society, and society wouldn't be a concern of his, as he put it.
One day, Yang Xinghai sent a letter to his family. He was okay, and he had given up on education to try a more practical alternative. He had gone to work for money. But he would quickly find that this quest for money wasn't a straight and narrow path. He got a construction job in Taiyuan, but he wasn't a builder, he was a cook, prepping meals for the construction workers. Now, there is dignity in labor, but the paycheck just didn't cut it. So, it wasn't long before Young was forced to change jobs. One of the major reasons his job situation was in constant flux was because many of his employers refused to pay him what they owed. This happened so many times at so many workplaces that he eventually broke bad and committed what investigators believe to have been his first crime.
I don't sound like a dick here. Should I be surprised that that happened in China back in the day? That you couldn't get people who didn't want to pay up? Should I be surprised by this?
Incensed with the restaurant that owed him months of wages, he stole an aluminum pot from their kitchen. This was the first time he would steal anything. But when he sold the aluminum pot for money, and when he held the 13 yuan he had earned from the theft and subsequent sale, he probably experienced a rush of euphoria, a eureka moment. You could say that a light bulb lit atop his head as he realized this was a much easier path through life. The moment Yang Xinghai became a petty criminal, he committed to this life. With the same devotion he had applied in high school before he quit, and the same fervor he gave the job market before he gave up, he committed. For the first time in his life, his hard work was receiving its due reward. And even when it wasn't, he knew he had more control over his fate than when he was working an honest living. So his criminality fully bloomed, and unfortunately for him, the law wasn't too far behind. In 1988, while pickpocketing, Yang Xinghai would get arrested by the police. He was sent to a labor camp, which was a punishment that far outweighed his crime. But this was communist China, and the law was the law. After spending 2 years behind bars, Yang was released. He returned to his village and continued with his petty theft. During this time, he also met a lady he liked. They both fell in love, and he was planning to marry her when he got arrested once again in 1991 for stealing in another city. The police called his father to identify him, but he wasn't allowed to speak to him. Somehow, Young was able to speak to his girlfriend, who promised to wait for him while he served his second stint in prison. Her promise is what kept him going through his 1-year sentence. Unfortunately, promises are fickle.
I wouldn't say.
Forget what the movies say about distance. It doesn't always make the heart grow fonder. Because when Young returned from his year-long stint in prison, he arrived home to a wedding celebration in his village and would find that his lover was the bride, and Young was not the groom. Heartbroken, enraged, and embarrassed, Young left his village and never returned. Whatever was happening in his psyche, whatever demons he had kept on a leash, were finally let loose, because it was after this incident that he added sexual crimes to his list of criminal indulgences.
He probably felt that women were the problem. That was the thing. This one woman's lie and not able to keep a promise is all it took for him to just fully hate on women and believe he could do whatever after he killed a woman.
In 1996, extremely lonely and too broke to afford a sex worker, Yang Xinghai tried to take advantage of a woman walking in a remote place in Zhejiang County. Luckily for her, she escaped, reported to the police, and got him arrested. Yang Xinghai would be charged for his first sexual case and sentenced to 5 years in prison. During his years in prison, he developed a sick hatred for humanity, a total disregard for human life, a cold approach to the sanctity of human existence, that if the authorities knew what he had become in their custody, they would have kept him in there permanently. Unfortunately, they didn't. Yang Xinghai was released in 2000, a year early, and as he stepped out of those prison gates for the first time in 4 years, you can imagine how eager he was to set fire to the world around him, how eager to watch it burn. At around noon on the 20th.
So we're about to find out just how evil and sadistic this guy got. This Yang guy got.
Of September 2000, a resident of a remote village in Henan province decided to pay a visit to an old couple because she hadn't seen them in a while. What that neighbor found in the home of 70-year-old Yang Peining and his wife, Shan Lanying, was the stuff of horror. The old couple had been robbed and viciously stabbed. However, the most horrifying detail was the hole in their foreheads. Whoever had taken their lives had taken the time to knock a hole in their heads with something that only a hammer and a steel rod could create. The nature of the crime was so unusual at the time, so bizarre, and so strange that the villagers began conducting their own investigation.
So instead of using the word macabre, he used the word strange. I like the word macabre better.
Before the police arrived. And when they were done, all fingers pointed to one of their neighbors, a man named Yang Dili. Yang Dili owed the old couple cigarette money and had quarreled with them many times that their beef had become the stuff of legend in the village. So when they were gruesomely murdered, the easiest answer that it was Yang Dili that killed them. When the police arrived, they conducted some messy detective work and came to the same conclusion as the villagers. However, they couldn't prove it. The only thing that they could prove was the fact that he owed the deceased couple cigarette money. Technically, this was theft. So they sentenced Yang Dili to a year in prison for that. While he was in prison, Yang Dili was interrogated again and again as the police tried to get a confession from him. Eventually, Yang Dili would confess to the grisly crime. But a few days later, he retracted his confession, claiming that he was tortured. This case bounced between legal departments across the province of Henan until it eventually made its way to the Procuratorate, China's version of the Supreme Court. Fortunately for Yang Dili, there was no clear or sufficient evidence that connected him to the crime. And in the absence of evidence, the Procuratorate ordered him to be released. Of course, Yang Dili was innocent. The real culprit was Yang Xinghai, and this was his first murderous crime. For his second murder, Yang Xinghai traveled away from his home province of Henan to another province called Anhui, probably because of fear. The distance between Henan and Anhui is a staggering 400 miles, roughly the same distance between the Netherlands and Berlin. And yet, Yang Xinghai traveled this incredible length of distance in only 10 days. The police would later learn that he alternated between trekking and riding stolen bicycles to travel to Anhui. Eventually, on the 1st of October, Yang Xinghai settled at a remote village in Anhui. There was a woman in that village. Her name was Qi Zhengying. At the age of 62, Qi Zhengying was famous for the masculine-like strength she possessed. Villagers often said that she was as strong as any man in the village. The terrain of her village was very rough at the time, from dirt roads to muddy paths, and tiny, yet unnecessary frequent hills. Most newcomers found their legs wrecked if they ever tried anything as simple as walking to the local market. But Qi Zhengying was so strong. She would sprint back home to the market and back with a bag full of groceries. And she did that almost every day. She also took care of her grandchildren. Her 7-year-old grandson, Zheng Yatao, and 12-year-old granddaughter, Zheng Yatang. Yang Xinghai killed all 3 of them. Qi Zhengying's temple was smashed in.
That is saying he just didn't care. He just wanted to kill. That's all he wanted. He just wanted to kill.
There was a big hole in her forehead, and her right jaw seemed to be stabbed with a knife to the point where her teeth were exposed. Her grandson was also stabbed in the neck, but the wound was not deep, and a piece of rope went straight into the flesh of his neck, which had been used to strangle him. Meanwhile, her granddaughter, little Yatang, was naked on her own bed. She had been touched, and there was also a big hole in the middle of her forehead. Much later, when the villagers found out that Yang Xinghai was the killer, it was difficult to believe. Yang was a gaunt, frail man, whom Qi Zhengying should have easily overpowered. But they didn't know that Yang Xinghai was a coward who crept up on people while they were asleep, after stalking them for days or even weeks. In the meantime, they crucified an innocent man for Yang Xinghai's crime, just like the village in Henan province had done to Yang Dili. His name was Chu Jiku, and if I was being completely honest with you, his hands weren't really that clean. Chu Jiku was 50, and he had used most of that time building a reputation for theft. And just as Yang Dili was to the old couple, he was the bane of Qi Zhengying's existence before her terrible demise. They hated each other with a passion. Chu Jiku caught and reared pigeons. He had 40 of them. And on the night of Qi Zhengying's brutal demise, someone stole 37 of them, leaving him with a very conservative sum of 3. Today, the police believe that Yang Xinghai was the one who stole the pigeons. They also believe that this wasn't the first time he had visited the village, and that he was fully aware of the testy relationship between Qi and Chu Jiku. To put it simply, Yang Xinghai had carefully chosen both his victim and the fall guy. He had orchestrated the perfect storm. Immediately arrested him. The scent.
That is insane. That this guy is so evil with his plan that he doesn't even just plan how he's gonna kill the people. He plans who he's gonna make take the fall for his killings. He thinks that of who I can get thrown in jail who is innocent just so they don't look at me.
If it wasn't so devilish, it would be incredibly impressive.
Agreed.
So when Chu Jiku reported his stolen birds to the police, they immediately arrested him. The police accused him of killing Qi Zhengying and interpreted his stolen birds as an ill attempt to deflect the investigators from himself. Unsurprisingly, many of the villagers were on the police's side. He was their prime suspect, and they treated him in that fashion. However, there were some villagers who reported seeing a young-looking, middle-aged stranger on the night Qi and her family were butchered. So while the police interrogated Chu Jiku, they searched the surrounding villages for young and middle-aged men who fit the description the villagers had given. They found nothing. And eventually, all they were left with was their prime suspect, Chu Jiku. Over the 10 days that would follow his arrest, Chu Jiku was interrogated by the police and taken to their district HQ, where he was kept in a basement for 5 days and nights, tortured and deprived of sleep, as the police tried to force a confession out of him. To make matters worse, the police searched his house and found a handmade gun, which he wasn't legally required to have.
Okay, I'm gonna say this. Now this is China. Back in the day, they probably didn't have much. The law probably wasn't great. I don't know how the law is now in China. I don't live there, obviously. But the one thing that is insane is I can't understand how if you torture, deprive a man of sleep, and try to beat a confession out of him, how could anyone take that confession as anything? Because no matter what, if I learn all that, no matter what, this guy is actually the killer. And everything points to him. Once you tell me he confessed after you had tortured him, deprived him of sleep, and kept him in a basement for 5 days and beat him until he confessed, I couldn't take the confession as anything.
Chu Jiku had used that gun to hunt rabbits and fish, but the police couldn't be bothered. This was all they needed to legally keep him in custody. So, they kept him another 15 days. There, they repeatedly asked him to explain the murder he committed. But there was nothing to explain. Eventually, Chu Jiku frustrated them to the point where they asked him to confess to thefts that he had committed in the past. He did this and then was sent to a detention center. During this period, the police tested everything from his semen to his saliva, trying to link him to the murder. But it came back negative. The police knew he wasn't the killer, but he was a thief. So in December of 2000, he was sent to a labor camp. He was eventually released on October 16, 2001. He had served his time for theft. In the eyes of the law, he was a free man. But in the court of public opinion, he was a killer. The village where he returned to was still convinced that he was the one who gruesomely murdered Qi Zhengying and her grandchildren. And this became such a serious problem for him and his family that his son couldn't even get married. While all of this was happening, the killings stopped. For some reason, young Xinghai took a 10-month break. Then, on the 15th of August, 2001, 2 months before Chu Jiku's release from prison, he struck again. This time, returning to Henan province. He killed a family of 3, a 42-year-old man, a 12-year-old daughter, and a 9-year-old son, by beating every one of them to death and knocking holes into their foreheads. And when he...
This guy has gotta be the definition of the devil. He literally is just a heartless thing. Because the fact is, he doesn't go after lonely people. He goes after children too. Like he seems like he almost makes sure there's children that he can kill.
was done, he descended to a new level of depravity by taking sexual advantage of the corpse of the 12-year-old girl. It was her grandmother who found them. The following month, young Qinghai would kill another 2 people in the same province, in a village called Fengqi Lu. Young Qinghai broke open their door, entered the house, beat the host and his cousin to death, and then stole 3 coins from the house. No amount was too small, as long as the target was available to violate. In fact, investigators believe that he didn't really care about the money because he behaved like the murder was the prize, and the theft was just a mere formality. He was getting high from the killings he carried out. December, another couple in a village in the same Henan province would meet a similar fate. Stabbed, assaulted, with a hole knocked in their foreheads. At this point, people had begun calling him the Hammerman. Now, you might be wondering, why the hole? Well, the truth is no one knows, and young Qinghai never cared to explain. There's a strong possibility he stumbled on it during his early killings and decided to make it a sinister calling card. Or
Are those words banned in speech, so he used the word macabre? Because I think macabre is a fantastic word that should be used more. So I don't know why he's not using it when he has it written here.
is it possible that while in prison he fantasized about it? Whatever it was, it continued to be his calling card even after he stopped assaulting his female victims. Again, no one knew why he paused the assaults. Some believe he did it to confuse the police, whom he believed were beginning to pick up his scent. But he overestimated them because they had no clue. And he underestimated himself because he had successfully spaced his killings far enough in time and so far apart geographically, never repeating a crime in the same city, that he had never had more than one of his crimes reported in the same police station, even when he was killing people in the same province. He also made sure that he murdered poor families because he knew their death wouldn't be treated as a priority. And since the police didn't share information between departments across cities or provinces, no one could identify the pattern. So, young Qinghai continued his spree until 2002. Without a doubt, 2002 was his bloodiest year. It was also the year that the police began to make sense of the bloodshed he left in his wake. On the 6th of January, a family of 5 fell victim to him. He beat them to death and resumed his rampage of perversion by sexually assaulting one of them, posthumously. Aside from this cruelty, the script remained the same. Stabbings, theft, and holes in all of the foreheads of his victims. 21 days later, young Qinghai would strike again, killing another 3 people, and once again, assaulting one. After this, he would take a break for 5 months before killing a family of 4 and assaulting one on the 30th of June. By the 28th of July, he was at it again, killing another 4, but this time assaulting 2 others. One question the investigators had was how he consistently escaped detection and never got caught by the villagers or the police. The answer Young would give was patience and preparation. Young Qinghai was incredibly careful while committing his crimes. His years in prison, or the police, and understand.
This man is pure evil. The man is evil and smart, and both those things, being purely evil, but yet still fucking smart, is dangerous, and it's usually why police never end up catching people for so fucking long.
And how the police worked, and how to evade them. He also had tricks of his own. He was able to mask his tracks from villagers by wearing his socks on his shoes, which meant that he left almost no shoe prints on the floorboards of the houses where he committed his crimes. And even though he left DNA at every crime scene, His movements were so coordinated and his killings so precise that the police were tricked into believing that he was close, probably from a neighboring village. Meanwhile, Yang Qinghai was a nomad with an endless thirst for blood and mayhem. On October 22nd, he snuck into the home of a family in another remote village in Henan and used a spade to batter a 34-year-old villager named Fan Chang and his 6-year-old daughter to death while they were asleep. Then, after he was sure they were dead, he assaulted the little girl's corpse. Fang's wife, Wu Qinghua, was pregnant at the time, and while Yang assaulted her too, she was able to escape with her life. Unfortunately, she suffered a miscarriage. All this while Yang Qinghai stayed several steps ahead of the police, but his streak was about to come to a startling halt. His luck was about to run out. In November 2002, a visiting officer followed her colleague to a crime scene in a remote village in Henan when she noticed that the crime was identical to an unsolved case from her department back home. A family of 5 had been attacked in Gaoli village in Zhimadian city, and the modus operandi was eerily similar to a case she'd had to deal with where a family of 4 was killed. 2 females had been assaulted, and 1 had barely escaped alive. Over the months that followed, this revelation would be shared across the police departments within the province of Henan as they slowly realized that they were dealing with the same criminal, a serial killer.
Wow, so just by luck of her, this one detective or cop being there at a different area when a killing took place leads up to the realization of like, I dealt with something similar to this. These might be more connected than you think.
In mid-November of 2002, while Yang assaulted and killed 2 people in another remote village within the province, the Henan Provincial Public Security Department finally made the decision to investigate their cases together, establishing a special investigation force to smoke out Yang Qinghai. They studied his crimes thoroughly, and through the witness reports of some of the victims who had survived, built a profile on him. One of the things they quickly realized was that their killer was someone with a criminal record. So, when Yang Qinghai killed his second batch of victims in the same month, battering a 60-year-old couple with a mallet, they decided to screen everyone that had been released from a labor camp for burglary, robbery, or rape from 1995 to August 2001. They scoured every prison on their database, checked and compared some 30,000 fingerprints of men between the ages of 25 to 40, because that was what was consistent with the profile of the murderer. Unfortunately, no leads were found. Not the blood, not the semen, and definitely not the hair samples they found at the crime scene matched anyone they screened, arrested, or re-interrogated. This period was really conflicting for the police because while they were hitting multiple dead ends in this serial murder case, they were stumbling on the solution to other murder cases and arresting the culprits. Meanwhile, Yang Qinghai was still taking victims. They didn't know whether to be grateful or frustrated. On the 1st and 13th of December, Yang Qinghai wreaked his trademark havoc on 2 families in Henan. But by that time, the police HQ began flooding access roads and remote villages in Henan with uniformed policemen. They didn't worry about spooking the serial killer. They had enough. They couldn't bear to lose more lives. And sure enough, Yang Qinghai was spooked. The moment police activity increased in Henan, he traveled out of the province and on the 15th, made a murderous stop in Anhui province, where he had once killed before. Yang Qinghai wouldn't kill again until February, exploring more remote areas in southern Henan that the police hadn't reached. On the 5th of February, after about 2 months, he attacked another family of 3, leaving 1 seriously injured and the remaining 2 dead. 13 days later, for the first time, Yang Qinghai targeted a town. He killed 4 people, assaulting 2 of them in Chaiying Township. This attack was brazen, and it caused great embarrassment for the Henan police, who were certain he only attacked poor villages. He was only trying once again to confuse the police. By March of 2003, Yang had committed at least 10 crimes in southern Henan alone, an average of 2 crimes per month. He had evaded the police this time, but they were willing to exercise patience. They had now connected all the crimes the madman had committed in Henan. They also knew what tools he used and how he used them. and who he was targeting. They were also certain he was poor and introverted with a criminal history. The police placed a bounty on his head, 100,000 yuan, which is roughly around $14,000 in today's money. It might not seem like a lot, but it was enough of a price to get most of the pacifist villagers riled up, because there was a palpable fear in the province. Villagers couldn't sleep at night. People were building fences around houses that, before the killings, had no need for fences. Innocent men were getting crucified, and the peace amongst neighboring villages was disrupted as distrust took the place of community. The police got volunteers in almost every village in the province to distribute, and I am not exaggerating when I say this, millions of posters which had the description of this killer. Reports flooded in. People were enthusiastically fishing out sketchy individuals. More remote villages were patrolled by the police.
I'm more curious how they actually caught him. Like, what made the connection happen? What caused him to be found? Because he seems to be doing this very well and getting away with it.
And those that were too remote to be reached kept watch, waiting for the hammerman to surface if he dared. The entire province of Henan was more than prepared to catch a killer. Unfortunately, they didn't. And that's because Yang Xinghai decided to leave the province permanently. He made the decision to commit his next crime in a place he hadn't committed any crimes, traveling to Shandong province. And on the 2nd of April, he brutally killed a young couple that was expecting their first child. But by this time, the police had learned their lesson. The police in Shandong immediately noticed the identical nature of the crime to the reports they had gotten from Henan and Anhui. So they contacted them and immediately began taking the same security measures that these provinces had taken. This immediate action most likely terrified Yang Xinghai and crippled his ability to continue his murderous rampage in Shandong because he wouldn't kill again for another 5 months. However, sometime during these 5 months, Yang Xinghai moved to Hebei, a completely new province where he hadn't committed any crimes. On the 5th of August, Yang Xinghai killed a family there with an axe he had stolen from a neighbor's house. It was a different weapon, but he was using the same script, trying to set up one villager against another. And the police immediately realized that it was the hammerman's work. But Yang Xinghai must have been desperate because 3 days later, and before the Hebei province police could respond adequately, he had killed yet another family in a nearby village.
It's almost like he's running out of time and trying to add up numbers. He's trying to get more and more and more people.
This was 2 cases in 5 days, the first in Yang Xinghai's murderous history. The police could smell the stink of his desperation and had a premonition of his future sloppiness. There was nowhere to hide, and other provinces were now waiting for him to slip. Yang Xinghai was practically a cornered mole, with police waiting at every hole he tried to stick his head out of. Ever since Henan province began investigating Xinghai's crime on one front, they dug so deep into his movement and behavior that they practically knew who he was. Their profile of the killer was scarily accurate. All they needed was a face and a name. They knew the killer was a homeless drifter who was incredibly good at covering his tracks. They were certain it was a skill that he had developed while in prison. They also correctly determined that the killer had never returned to his hometown from the moment he committed his first crime. When they applied this profile to the list of criminals they had in their database, Yang Xinghai was one of a handful of criminals who made the shortlist. They didn't know he was their killer at the time, but they interrogated his father, who insisted his son did not belong on their list. They even took blood samples from Yang's father, trying to find a match, but the results were inconclusive. The police weren't sure who the killer was, but they knew they were close, very close. On the 2nd of November 2003, the police received a report about a suspicious-looking person that was loitering in a hall in Kanjiao City. This man had no proper job or means of identification. He'd been sleeping in a public bathroom and washing rooms. Eventually, a staff member decided to report him to the police. The police instructed the staff not to disturb him. However, they were also instructed to keep an eye on the man. The next day, some policemen arrived and watched him closely as he wandered aimlessly near a primary school in the city. But he had already noticed that he was being followed. The moment the police tried closing in, he fled. But by that time, he was surrounded. And by the time the police caught up with him, they found a pocket knife and 500 yuan in his pocket. Back at the station, they quickly realized he was the perfect fit for the profile of the killer. He even had a Hunan accent. Everyone was sure they had found him, and the results of a blood test came back. They were proven right. "What's your name?" they asked him. "Yang Xinghai."
The man literally just made a mistake by hiding in bathrooms. Some finally reported him, and they watched him and got caught, and that was it. He was screwed then on.
Came the response. "67 cases of premeditated murder, 23 cases of premeditated sexual assault, and 10 cases of battery, all in the span of 4 years across 4 different provinces. There was no medal for this, but Yang Xinghai was officially the most prolific killer China had ever known since it became a communist republic in 1949. But Yang himself,
Evil and sadistic and heartless, finally caught, and finally there's some peace because he ain't fucking going ever being free again.
wasn't bothered. At first, he maintained his evasiveness and added a dash of arrogance. He reportedly told the police, "If there is evidence, I will admit it. If there's no evidence, don't try to scare me." When the police confronted him with the DNA evidence, he responded, "I know DNA is science. Isn't it 99% accurate? I'm the 1%. The police were pretty certain that he didn't understand the gravity of his crime.
Oh, but he did.
So they tried to explain it to him. And he cut them short with, "Please be brief. I understand all this." Eventually, when they confronted him with all the 67 murders he was accused of, Yang Xinghai panicked. However, he still maintained an air of superiority, protesting, "You can't pile all the cases of the whole country on my head." Eventually, Yang Xinghai would admit to all the crimes he committed. He sang like a bird, explaining how he carried out each and every act of depraved violence, what tools he used, and how it made him feel. He was a nutcase, but insanity was no excuse for his crimes.
Probably wasn't then. People try to use it now. People try to use it for so many times. You know how many times cases happen, everyone tries to plead insanity, hoping it'll get them out of it?
Yang Xinghai didn't try to claim insanity.
Good.
He showed no remorse, and he even expressed regret that he wasn't able to commit other crimes. The police were
Man was like, I do have regrets. I regret that I didn't get to kill more of you bastards. I wish I didn't get to kill more people.
confused because Young wasn't trying to save himself. It was almost like he was throwing himself under the bus.
Yep.
Trying to commit one more murder. Trying to take out one final victim by proxy. Himself. His case went to trial. Court proceedings began on the 1st of February 2004 at exactly 8 a.m. and lasted until 12:30 noon, then stopped for a 30-minute break. During that half-hour break, Yang Xinghai and all the staff ate. But it was Yang Xinghai that was the most vocal, praising the meal and thanking the court staff for it. You can easily imagine how puzzled they were. The trial continued into the second day, and throughout the final hour of the court proceedings, Young was full of what many witnesses present in the court at that time described as cadence and spirit. His voice was louder than the judges, and he sounded more like a man that had won the lottery than someone facing the death penalty. By
Maybe to him that is the lottery though. Like he finally got his chance to get out of society. So that's to him why he's so acting like he's so excited. He finally got his way out.
7:40 a.m. on the second day of the trial, Yang Xinghai was found guilty. And right there in court, he told them he wouldn't appeal the verdict, even though he had 15 days to appeal his sentence. Yang waited out those days, and who knows what was going through his head. I mean, who cares? On the 14th of February 2004, he was executed by a firing squad. A quick death, more merciful than the one he had handed to his 67 victims. Thanks for tuning in to Twisted Minds. That was...
Ladies and gentlemen, that is it for this reaction video. Let me know what you think in the comments. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all for the next one.